Minimalist abstract wood wall hangings don't try to overwhelm a wall with detail or color. They don't shout for attention the way bold artwork does. They exist quietly, like a breath between thoughts, shaping the room with balance, texture, and stillness. They bring wood, warm, organic, grounding, into spaces that might otherwise feel too cold or too empty, without making the room feel crowded. Most pieces start with restraint. One species of wood, sometimes two, but never so many that it feels busy. Pale maple, for a calm and subtle tone. Rich walnut, for a deeper warmth that doesn't need stain to feel complete. White oak, with a grain that catches light in slow, deliberate waves. Sometimes the wood is reclaimed, its surface lightly sanded but not erased, keeping traces of its past while still feeling refined. The material isn't just a backdrop. It's the whole point. The designs are abstract but controlled. Long, narrow slats arranged in a staggered formation, like a rhythm frozen mid-beat. Circles and arcs, cut thin and mounted in overlapping layers so they cast faint shadows on the wall. Geometric fragments, triangles, rectangles, hexagons, set apart with small gaps so the negative space feels as intentional as the wood itself. Some compositions are symmetrical, calming the eye. Others are deliberately off balance, but in a way that feels intentional, not random. Many pieces use depth to their advantage. Thin panels set slightly forward from a backing board, or floating directly off the wall on small mounts, so shadows change as the day moves. The wood itself might shift in texture, smooth in one area, softly brushed in another, with carved or etched lines so light glances across the surface in subtle ways. Nothing flashy. Just enough to make the piece feel alive as the lighting shifts from morning to night. The colors remain quiet. Natural tones dominate, finished with matte oils or waxes that bring out the grain without gloss. Occasionally a section is charred or darkened for contrast, or a pale wood is paired with a deeper one for a gentle duality. But the palette always stays soft, because the strength of these hangings isn't in contrast. It's in harmony. In a modern room, these pieces soften the harder edges. Against white walls and steel fixtures, they bring warmth without breaking the clean aesthetic. In more rustic or natural spaces, they blend rather than compete, acting as a subtle bridge between the room and its furniture. They can stand as the only art on a wall, or as part of a quiet rhythm, multiple pieces spaced apart so the room feels measured rather than filled. Some designs are modular. Separate elements, each a shape or a panel, that can be arranged and rearranged as the space evolves. Others are singular, one solid composition, mounted flush, like it was built with the wall rather than added after. Both approaches work because they keep the focus on the wood itself, not on ornate framing or embellishment. Making one of these pieces is more about restraint than complexity. Every decision is a reduction, trimming excess, sanding until the grain feels right, aligning each shape so it holds space without taking over. The wood is cut and prepared, but not altered so much that it loses its identity. The grain is still there. The texture is still there. The joinery stays invisible, so the forms feel like they simply exist rather than being assembled. When one of these hangings is finished and placed, it doesn't demand constant attention. It becomes part of the atmosphere. You notice it when you first walk into the room, and then you let it fade into the background, only to catch it again when the light shifts and a new shadow falls across the grain. It doesn't age in a way that grows stale. It settles into the space, becoming part of the room's rhythm rather than a fixed point of focus. And at night, when the room quiets down and the artificial light casts softer shadows, the wood changes again. Its surface deepens. The carved lines or layered edges catch the glow, the grain darkens, and the whole piece feels less like decor and more like something breathing slowly with the room. It doesn't feel like a wall ornament. It feels like part of the wall, not competing with the silence, but holding it. It's in those moments, when the house is still, the light is low, and the room feels like it has space to breathe, that these minimalist abstract wood wall hangings reveal their full weight. They don't shout. They don't push. They simply exist, quietly grounding the space, proving that sometimes, the most powerful pieces aren't the ones that fill every inch, but the ones that leave room for everything else to settle around them. Minimalist abstract wood wall hangings carry a kind of quiet presence that few forms of art can match. They don't shout for attention. They don't overwhelm the eye with complexity or color. Instead, they lean into the natural beauty of wood, its grain, its texture, its tones, and pair that with deliberate, restrained design choices that leave space for the viewer to pause and breathe. They exist somewhere between sculpture and painting, not quite two-dimensional, not entirely three-dimensional, and because of that, they can transform a wall in subtle but powerful ways. The first thing you notice when you look at one of these pieces is how much the wood itself does the talking. The grain becomes part of the composition, flowing like a soft pattern beneath the shapes or forms cut and arranged on the surface. Sometimes it's bold and expressive, with deep contrasts and swirling growth lines that feel almost like brushstrokes. Other times it's soft and understated, the lines running in calm, even rhythms, like ripples on still water. In both cases, the material carries an honesty that synthetic surfaces can't replicate. Even before you study the design, you feel the warmth of the wood. The forms themselves are simple but intentional. Circles, arcs, overlapping planes, and geometric shapes are common, often layered or recessed to create depth without adding noise. Negative space, the areas left open, untouched, is just as important as the wood that's present. A single circular panel, sliced by a diagonal cut where one half shifts slightly forward, can create a sense of motion with almost no detail. A series of slender vertical slats, each slightly offset, can cast soft shadows across the wall, shifting as the light changes throughout the day. These pieces don't rely on complexity. They rely on balance, proportion, and the natural way light and shadow play across the surface. Many of these wall hangings are made from pale woods like ash, maple, or birch, their light tones softening the space around them. Others lean toward darker, richer species like walnut or oak, creating a quiet contrast when set against lighter walls. Sometimes multiple tones of wood are combined, a pale background panel with a darker overlay of thin, linear elements, creating a subtle layering of color that feels more like tone-on-tone texture than high-contrast design. The finishes are almost always matte, allowing the surface to catch light softly rather than glaring. They invite touch, even if you don't actually reach out your hand. What makes minimalist abstract wood wall hangings so compelling is how they change depending on the room and the light. In morning sunlight, they can feel bright and open, the grain almost glowing. In softer evening light, the same piece can seem quieter, more intimate, its shapes casting long, diffused shadows that make it feel deeper, more sculptural. If there's artificial lighting placed nearby, even a small shift in angle can bring out new layers of detail, from the subtle texture of the surface to the delicate shadows formed by layered elements. They don't need to move to feel alive. The world around them does the work. The scale can vary, but each size carries its own effect. A single, modestly sized hanging over a desk or reading nook can become a calm focal point, a piece you find yourself glancing at when your thoughts drift. A large, wide panel across a dining or living room wall can anchor the entire space, adding texture and warmth without crowding the room. Some pieces are modular, designed so that several panels can be arranged together in different configurations, a set of 3 or 5 that can be spaced apart, stacked vertically, or aligned in a row, letting the owner choose the rhythm and balance that feels right for their space. Even then, the pieces maintain their quiet nature. They don't demand symmetry, but they invite it if that's what feels harmonious. When you get closer to one of these hangings, you start to notice the small details that give it life. The edges of the shapes may be beveled just slightly, softening the transition between light and shadow. The grain may shift direction between different sections, adding subtle visual movement even when the piece is still. If multiple woods are used, you can trace where their tones meet, the warm honey of one species flowing into the deeper chocolate of another, like a landscape painted not with pigment, but with material itself. Some pieces even incorporate faint carvings or etchings, shallow enough to barely break the surface but deep enough to catch light differently, creating patterns that only fully reveal themselves when viewed from certain angles. The beauty of their minimalism is that they never overwhelm. They leave room for the wall itself, for the space around them, to breathe. In a room filled with color, they can ground the palette, offering a natural, neutral anchor. In a monochrome space, they can become the texture that keeps the room from feeling flat or cold. Their simplicity makes them versatile, but their natural material gives them warmth, ensuring that they never feel sterile, no matter how clean the design. Over time, these pieces evolve in small, quiet ways. Wood naturally shifts with age, even when sealed. Tones deepen slightly, soft areas mellow into richer hues, and the grain gains a kind of depth that feels earned rather than applied. A piece that looked pale and new when first hung might, years later, carry a soft golden warmth, like it has absorbed a little of the life around it. These changes aren't flaws. They are part of why wood is chosen over synthetic materials in the first place. The art becomes a record of time, subtle and unspoken, but always present. In the right space, these wall hangings can change how the room feels without demanding constant attention. You might not stare at them every day, but you'll notice how the room feels calmer, more complete, when they are there. You'll notice how the light seems softer, how the walls feel less stark, how the space feels like it has a pulse rather than just surfaces. And when you do pause to really look, you'll find layers to appreciate: the flow of the grain, the careful proportions, the way the negative space feels just as intentional as the wood itself. Minimalist abstract wood wall hangings remind us that art doesn't need to be loud to have presence. It doesn't need to cover every inch of the wall or dazzle with color to transform a space. Sometimes, it just needs to be honest, to let the material speak, to let the design breathe, and to create a moment of stillness in the midst of everything else. They aren't there to dominate. They're there to balance, to ground, to offer a sense of calm every time your eyes pass over them. And perhaps that's what makes them resonate so deeply. In a world filled with noise and constant motion, a piece of art that can make a wall feel alive yet quiet, textured yet simple, becomes more than just decoration. It becomes a presence, steady, calming, and enduring, reminding you, in its subtle way, that beauty can exist in restraint, and that even the simplest shapes, when paired with something as timeless as wood, can feel profound.